There's little question this has been one of the toughest questions Christians have faced through the centuries. This isn't a modern question, it's an older question. But modern sensitivities have made the question that much more pertinent. We feel the pain of this far much more now. One of the hardest things about it is, in fact, that we see and read of God's own thoughts in the commanding of the extermination of the Canaanites. And making it feel so much worse is that women and children are discussed in this context. I think it is shocking, and I think we're supposed to feel the weight of it. The second thing that makes it so difficult, unlike, let's say, a so-called act of God, a tornado or an earthquake that kills women and children, is that in this case, God commands His people to be His agents of extermination. And the shocking thing about that is that His people, they are sinful themselves. There is the difficult side that we look at, but if we are to be honest with the Bible, we have to take a look at what else the Bible teaches us that is really the other side of the coin. First of all, comes up at the very heart of this question is this ethically just? Is it even right because of these women and children? Well, not everyone will accept this answer, and I myself, before I was a Christian, would have hated this answer. The answer is that God alone is a righteous judge. Will the God of all the earth judge righteously? You may not, or maybe I might not, see how, reading the Bible, reading the story of life around me, how God can be just and allow these things to happen. I think there's a biblical teaching that I hope I can show at least some of the reasons why we should trust that God really is just in the way He does these things. But fundamentally, what the Bible teaches us is that God is just whether we completely understand how, and that for us to assume that He is somehow unjust is in fact to assume that we know more about things than we really do. We don't know everything. So God alone is in a place of righteousness where He can pronounce these judgments. That's important fundamentally as part of the answer to this problem. Second, we need to understand this was not an arbitrary ethnic cleansing. Indeed, the Bible highlights this as a very important event in God's rescue plan for the human race, and more on that shortly. But in fact, this is a specific judgment on a morally degraded people. We know this not only from biblical descriptions of what the Canaanite people were like, but from archaeology. And the sorts of horrific sacrificial practices is just one example of offering their children to gods in very painful sorts of deaths. In fact, the Bible shows that God's judgment on the Canaanites was held back. He predicts it 400 years before it happens in the book of Genesis in chapter 15, and describes it as he's waiting until the sin of the Canaanite people is full. And a very interesting theological concept, but again, it's not arbitrary. The measure of their degradation was full. And this leads then to a very important point I already alluded to. God, beginning with Abraham, has a mission to rescue a sinful human people. And it involves fallible and sinful agents like Abraham all the way to the present with people like me. And one of the things that's clear in this extermination is that God warns that the very people, by that time a whole nation, would be corrupted by the Canaanites if in fact they are allowed to remain. one of the interesting things that's often mentioned when people stumble over this question is that, in fact, the Bible makes clear that the Canaanites were never fully exterminated, number one, and number two, exactly what God says happened. Indeed, throughout the Old Testament, the major problem is that over and over again, the people of God mix the worship of God the Creator, the one true God, with Baal or some other version of Canaanite religion. So the judgment was not only righteous, it was part of a necessary attempt to protect the very people of God he would use as part of his mission. But there's another point here, lest it seem unfair that the people of God were told to be the instruments of his judgment in this case. It is that God judged his own people, Israel, harsher than he did anyone else. And in fact, the story throughout the Old Testament over and again is that because of their sinfulness, which is worse than the Canaanites, because they knew the one true God, God uses the pagan nations, the very same kinds of people, whether Egyptians or Assyrians or earlier Babylonians, to bring judgment on the very people of God. So there's a warning here, I think, that we need to think about in conclusion. Jesus tells a story in his day where Jewish thinkers were wondering about natural disasters, why certain people, let's say, if a tower fell on someone, God clearly allowed it to happen. They must have been terrible sinners. And Jesus warns and says, don't think that somehow you're better because this hasn't happened to you. These things serve as a warning to all of us who are sinful. And this shocking story of the extermination command is in fact highlighted in the very story itself in the book of Joshua with God's rescue of a prostitute Canaanite, Rahab. Because she seeks the God, the one true God, she is spared, and her family. Not only is she spared, she will become the grandmother of King David and will end up in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. She stands out, in fact, she's mentioned in the book of James, the book of Hebrews. She stands out as a kind of hero of the faith. It's a foreshadowing of and there are many others in the Bible. This one just gets our attention, but there are many of these kinds of judgments, and they are all around us to this day, that we are supposed to be forewarned by. And no one gives us a greater warning of the dangers of the life to come in an unredeemed state than Jesus Christ himself. Jesus had more to say about the pending judgment, yet he himself was the very one who gave himself a sacrifice that those who believe in him might be saved. So this is the amazing grace, the other side of judgment that we see in the unique story that's the Bible. And I think if we think of it in the bigger picture in the light of Jesus' teachings, then I think we actually see it for what it is. It is a merciful warning.
Thanks for watching Honest Answers. Don't forget to subscribe to find out the answer to next Wednesday's question.